Usually when we talk about changing our lives, there's this deeply ingrained expectation of simple, almost mechanical cause and effect.
Right, like a vending machine.
Yeah, exactly. Think about sitting at a computer. You want to open a new program, so you move the mouse, you double-click that shiny new icon on your desktop, and boom, the program runs.
And it feels great.
It does. It's visible, it's neatly categorized. It is incredibly comforting because the interface is, well, it's essentially lying to you.
It is.
It's telling you that reality is just a series of isolated, clickable buttons.
Right, what they call the user illusion. I mean, it's a beautifully designed fiction, you know?
Totally.
You click the button, you get the predictable result, and you are completely shielded from the millions of lines of machine code that are actually executing in the dark to make that happen.
But then you try to make a lasting transformation in your actual life, and suddenly clicking the icon does absolutely nothing.
The screen freezes.
The screen freezes. The same old error messages pop up. And we're frantically clicking these like self-help icons on the desktop of our minds.
Click the boundaries icon.
Right. Click the boundaries icon, click the productivity icon, hoping to change how the machine works. But we're looking at a landscape that is entirely murky because we're literally trying to rewrite software using a mouse.
We have absolutely no idea what the actual machine code underneath is doing.
Yeah.
And more importantly, we don't realize that the software we are trying to change is locked in an operating system we didn't consciously install.
Okay, so let's unpack this, because if you are listening to this right now, yes, you are probably intimately familiar with that exact feeling of frantic clicking.
We all are.
We all are. I mean, you wouldn't be tuning into this deep dive if you weren't trying to access the developer mode of your own life.
Exactly.
So our mission today is to explore a transformative shift in how we operate in the world. We're talking about moving from being a passive user of life's interface to becoming an architect.
And ultimately, a conscious participant in the systems around us.
Yes. So the source material we're diving into today, chapters 9, 10, and the interludes leading into Meta-Matics, provides this profoundly structured framework for this transition.
But we have to fundamentally adjust our lens first.
How so?
Well, the goal isn't just to learn a few new buzzwords to add to the desktop.
Yeah.
It is to recognize the hidden architecture currently running your daily decisions, your relationships, and really the broader ecosystems you exist within.
Which is terrifying, honestly.
It is. Most of us assume we are living our lives, but these texts suggest a much more sobering reality, which is that we are actually being lived by a set of invisible legacy systems.
Legacy software kicking in. It's like, okay, it's like a script written when you were a terrified 14-year-old is still quietly executing in the background when you're, say, a 35-year-old manager.
Precisely.
Just subtly dictating how you handle a performance review.
Yes, exactly that.
So before we can even touch our own personal habits, the source material says we have to zoom way out.
We have to look at the macro level.
Right, because personal transformations absolutely do not happen in a vacuum.
Yeah.
Which introduces this concept of the fractal truth.
Right. And a fractal, by definition in geometry, is a complex pattern where each part has the same statistical character as the whole.
So it looks the same no matter how close or far away you are.
Exactly. It repeats itself at every scale, from the microscopic all the way to the cosmic.
Okay.
And the text applies this mathematical absolute to human behavior.
Which is wild.
It is. What it argues, and this is a pretty heavy realization, is that your personal patterns are never just personal. They replicate.
Okay, give me a tangible example of that replication. Like, how does a thought in my head actually become a macro-level system?
Okay, let's trace a pattern of scarcity.
Scarcity.
Imagine a founder of a company who grew up in an environment where resources were unpredictable.
So money was tight or love was conditional, that kind of thing.
Exactly. So their internal micro-pattern becomes this anxious hoarding of control. They believe, at a core level, if I don't hold tightly to this, it will disappear.
Got it.
So that is the personal pattern. But when they interact with their co-founder, that internal pattern scales up and becomes a relational pattern.
Oh, I see.
It becomes a lack of trust, a refusal to delegate, micromanagement.
So the internal anxiety becomes interpersonal friction.
Yes, But it doesn't stop there.
Of course not.
Because they are the founder, that relational pattern scales up again into an organizational pattern.
So the whole company starts acting like that.
Yes, the company's internal policies become rigid, budgets are suffocated,
Departments are probably
siloed and pitted against each other for resources. The culture becomes deeply paranoid and competitive.
Wow.
And eventually, that organizational pattern scales up into an ecological or market pattern.
Wait, how does it hit the market?
Well, the company starts burning bridges with vendors, they alienate clients, and they essentially pollute their industry ecosystem with predatory practices.
All from that one internal script.
A multi-million-dollar corporate collapse, entirely seeded by one person's unexamined internal fear of scarcity. That is the fractal truth.
The ripple effect is absolute. The text uses this brilliant ant colony metaphor to illustrate this nested architecture.
Oh, I love that part.
It's so good. The ant is just walking along a chemical trail, reacting to pheromones.
Right.
The ant has zero concept that it is part of a colony.
It's just doing its ant thing.
Exactly. And the colony operates as this massive synchronized whole, but the colony doesn't know it's part of a forest ecosystem.
Yes.
And the forest doesn't know it's regulating the entire biosphere. They're all nested systems, completely blind to the layer above them.
But the architect, the person who has stepped out of that user mindset, actually sees those nested systems.
They see the whole stack.
Right. They can see how the ant's behavior affects the biosphere. And what's really fascinating here is how the text applies this nested reality to a mathematical concept called the position of one.
The position of one. Let's dig into that because that's huge.
Yeah, so in algebra, the number 1 isn't just a digit, right? It is the unity operator.
It's the anchor.
It's the identity element. It is the anchor around which the rest of the equation revolves.
Okay.
So at the personal level, you, the individual, must hold that position of 1.
Makes sense.
But at the relational level, the relationship itself, what the text calls the third, holds that center.
Oh, the third. So in a marriage, the one isn't me and it isn't my partner.
Right.
The one is the marriage itself. And we are both operating in service to the health of that third entity.
Precisely. You serve the third. But as you scale up to the organizational or ecological level, a single person, or even a single relationship, cannot mechanically hold the center anymore.
It's just too big.
The mass is too great. At that scale, a principle must hold the position of 1.
A principle, like what?
Like a core mission, a constitutional value, or a deep principle of interdependence.
Okay, so if a single CEO's ego tries to be the one.
Or a raw obsession with quarterly profit tries to hold the position of 1 at an organizational level.
The system mathematically destabilizes.
It has to. It collapses under its own weight.
Because you are trying to balance a skyscraper on a pinpoint that was literally never engineered to bear that kind of load.
Exactly.
But let me push back on this for a second.
Go for it.
Because bringing this back down to the personal level, how do we actually bear the weight of that responsibility?
What do you mean?
Well, if every bad mood I have, every time I, snap at a coworker or withdraw from my partner, ripples out and literally poisons the fractal ecosystem, that is completely paralyzing.
It does sound like a lot of pressure.
I mean, I am just picturing the listener trying to perfectly manage their energy 24 hours a day so they don't accidentally destabilize the biosphere with a grumpy Tuesday morning.
Right, right. And if we connect this to the bigger picture of the text, it is crucial to clarify that this architecture is not about perfection.
Oh, thank goodness.
Yeah. Striving for flawless energy management is actually just another control pattern.
That makes total sense.
The framework is about participation. You are going to slip. You are going to run old survival scripts.
Because we're human.
Exactly. The transformative shift isn't from being a flawed human to a flawless machine.
Okay.
The shift is moving from what the source calls a responsive variable to an autonomous variable.
Yes, we need to break down the literal math of this.
Yeah.
Because the acronyms R1V and AV1 pop up everywhere in these sources.
Yeah.
So what do those variables actually represent?
Think about basic algebra. You have constants and you have variables.
Okay.
In the R1V state, which stands for responsive variable, the external world is holding the 1.
So the external world is the constant.
Exactly. The room you walk into, the traffic jam, the aggressive email from your boss, the external environment dictates the terms.
And I'm the V.
You are the V. You are the variable responding to it.
So if the room is a chaotic 10 out of 10, I become a chaotic 10 out of 10.
You match it.
If my boss is projecting anxiety, I just absorb and reflect that anxiety. I am basically just a thermometer.
You are matching the temperature, yes. The world acts, and you react. You have no center of gravity.
Okay, so that's R1V.
But when you shift to AV1, the autonomous variable, you become the one.
Ah.
You hold your center based on your internal principles,
Yep.
your stated targets, your core truth.
So what happens to the external conditions?
The external conditions, the angry boss, the traffic, the chaotic room, those become the variables.
They're the V now.
Yes. They are just floating data points that you interact with rather than forces that define your state of being.
You bring your own weather.
I love that.
I love that phrasing so much.
Yeah.
The world doesn't dictate if it's raining in my mind. I do.
Exactly.
So to answer my own question about the paralyzing weight of responsibility,
Yeah.
it's not about never having a bad mood.
No.
It's about noticing the exact millisecond you have slipped into R1V when you are just reacting to the world and making a conscious micro-adjustment to return to AV1.
That micro-adjustment is everything.
Why is it so crucial?
Because by changing your own architecture in that moment, you literally change the available pathways for everyone around you in the fractal.
Right.
If someone comes at you with aggressive R1V energy and you meet them with grounded AV1 energy,
You break the circuit.
you break the chain of replication, you stop passing on unconscious survival patterns, and you start offering alignment patterns to the ecosystem.
I see the power in that. I really do. But I have to be honest, knowing that my micro-adjustments ripple out and affect the whole system, it still sounds incredibly daunting if I have to consciously monitor my AV1 status every single second of the day.
It would be exhausting.
Like if I have to constantly ask myself, wait, am I the 1 right now or am I the V? I'm going to blow a cognitive gasket.
Oh, absolutely.
It just takes too much RAM to run that program manually.
Which is exactly why the architecture must become automatic.
Right.
If you rely on brute force willpower to maintain the position of 1, you will inevitably burn out and default back to your deepest survival scripts.
We've all been there.
This is the crucial bridge in the text. You cannot sustain macro-level systems mastery without moving into embodied unconscious competence.
The journey from manual transmission to automatic.
Exactly.
Now, the text maps this out through the 4 stages of competence. And I know you, listening, are probably well-versed in the basics of self-awareness, so we won't linger too long in the shallow end here.
Right. Let's just do a quick recap.
We all know stage 1, unconscious incompetence.
You don't know what you don't know.
Exactly. You are bleeding out energy, saying yes to things you hate, resenting everyone, and you honestly think life is just happening to you.
It is the ultimate R1V state, completely blind to its own mechanics.
Yep. And of course, stage 2 is conscious incompetence.
You read the book?
You read the book, you listened to this deep dive, you learned the terms, you now know what AV1 is, but you have absolutely no ability to execute it under pressure.
It's the gap between knowing the theory of riding a bike and actually getting on the seat and immediately crashing into a mailbox.
Yes, the mailbox gets me every time. And this is where the text introduces the mechanism for crossing that gap. 4DP.
The four-dimensional processing framework.
Right. When you are in stage 3, conscious competence, you are heavily relying on 4DP to keep you from crashing into the mailbox.
Let's break down the mechanics of that 4DP processing, because stage 3 is where the real architectural friction happens.
It's the sweaty stage.
It really is.
Yeah.
In conscious competence, you can hold your boundaries, you can maintain your AV1 center, but it requires immense deliberate effort. You have to actively run the 4DP protocol.
What are the 4 steps?
First, detect the trigger. Second, detach from the immediate emotional variable. Third, determine where the 1 actually is in this dynamic. And fourth, deploy the autonomous response.
That is a lot of steps to run while someone is staring at you waiting for an answer.
It's huge cognitive load.
Let's use the classic example from the text. A colleague asking you to take on extra work that isn't your job.
Perfect example.
So in stage 3, when they ask, you feel that familiar panic rise. Your heart rate spikes.
You literally have to buy time.
You might start sweating. You run the 4DP protocol in your head. Detect the people-pleasing urge. Detach from their urgency.
Determine that your capacity is the 1.
Determine your capacity is the 1. And finally, deploy the boundary. You force the words out. I don't have the capacity for that right now.
It is a massive victory.
It is, but it leaves you totally exhausted.
Yep.
You have to turn the key in the ignition and flood the engine with gas every single time you want to move forward.
The friction is high because you are literally carving a new neural pathway.
Physical changes in the brain.
Exactly. You are myelinating a new circuit of behavior through sheer conscious repetition.
Okay.
But if you sustain that 4DP practice long enough, the myelin sheath thickens. The pathway becomes a superhighway.
And that is how the transition occurs.
Yes. The heavy manual processing of stage 3 collapses into an instantaneous reflex.
Which brings us to the promised land.
Stage 4.
Stage 4, unconscious competence. The visceral, full-body relief of stage 4.
It's a profound shift.
It really is. This is the phase where the text notes your internal dialogue profoundly shifts. You stop saying, I need to practice my boundaries today, and you simply realize, this is just who I am now.
Alignment becomes your default physiological state.
It's when the architecture moves from being something you do to being something you are.
Right. So in our example with the colleague asking for extra work,
At stage 4, there is no spike in heart rate,
there is no sweating.
no frantic 4DP processing. The colleague makes the request, and your body simply responds, let me check my capacity and get back to you.
Zero drama.
Zero internal guilt negotiation. The boundary happens as an automatic reflex governed by your core principles.
It really does sound like a superpower.
It does. But here is where I get suspicious.
Oh.
Yeah. Is stage 4 the finish line? Because it sounds a bit like utopian nirvana.
You're right.
Do we just reach unconscious competence, kick our feet up, and coast through a friction-free existence forever?
A lot of people think so.
Does the text actually claim we just stop having internal drama and stop growing?
It claims the exact opposite, actually. And this raises an important question about the nature of growth.
Tell me.
The text introduces what it calls the paradox of mastery.
The paradox of mastery.
Right. When you reach unconscious competence, you actually stop noticing your own mastery.
Oh, because it's automatic.
Because it takes no effort. You forget how hard it used to be. The friction is gone, so the sensation of growth disappears.
You feel like you're stuck.
If you aren't careful, stage 4 can feel like complete stagnation.
You take your own transformation for granted. The desktop interface feels so smooth you forget all the blood, sweat, and tears it took to rewrite the machine code.
Exactly. Therefore, the practice at this stage is to deliberately consciously celebrate the integration.
Okay.
But to your point about nirvana, no, stage 4 is not the finish line.
What is it then?
It is a new baseline. Think about the cognitive load we discussed earlier.
Right, the RAM.
In stage 3, 90% of your RAM was used just to hold a simple boundary.
Yeah.
In stage 4, that boundary takes 1% of your RAM. So what happens to the other 89%?
It frees up. I have all this excess processing power now.
And that excess processing power allows you to perceive the next level of complexity in your life.
Which forces you into stage 5.
Yes. Stage 5, meta-awareness.
The more you know, the more you realize you don't know.
Exactly. You hit unconscious competence in holding a boundary with a coworker, but that new elevated baseline suddenly makes you realize you have absolutely no boundaries with your own ambition.
Oh, wow. Ouch. So you start the entire cycle over again, but at a higher altitude.
It is a continuous upward spiral. And this realization that integration frees up the cognitive load for higher complexity is the precise threshold where the source material transitions us.
Where are we going?
From the physical embodiment of our habits into the formal, strategic design of our futures.
Which brings us to the interludes, the bridge.
The bridge, yes.
Once you hit that stage 4 baseline, you are no longer just learning how to play the scales on an instrument.
You are stepping into the concert hall.
You have the excess RAM to actually compose something. Now, the source material does something structurally fascinating here that I really want to highlight.
The formatting change.
Yes, the text literally changes its formatting. It shifts from using Arabic numerals, 1, 2, 3, to Roman numerals, Y, 2, 3.
It's a very intentional shift.
Why change the numbering? Like, what is the subtle psychological cue there?
It is a profound structural metaphor. Arabic numerals imply linear accumulation.
Adding more things.
Right, they imply a sequence of adding more and more tools to a toolbox, 1, then 2, then 3. You are gathering data.
Okay.
But by switching to Roman numerals, the text is signaling a hard stop to that linear gathering.
You are done accumulating.
You don't need another self-help book. You don't need another hack.
That's a relief.
Roman numerals, in this context, represent thematic depth and structural pillars. You stop moving forward to acquire, and you start moving inward to deepen.
It is the transition from the foyer of understanding into the house of being. I am absolutely obsessed with this metaphor from the text.
It's incredibly resonant.
We spend so much of our lives lingering in the foyer.
We really do.
The foyer of understanding is where you acquire the vocabulary. It's where you learn the concepts, map your variables, identify your traumas.
But eventually you have to cross the threshold.
You have to actually live in the house of being.
And this is where we encounter the trap of preparation masquerading as action.
The workshop junkie trap.
Yeah.
Here is where it gets really interesting.
Oh, yeah.
The text explicitly warns us about becoming professional students of our own lives.
It's a very comfortable place to hide.
These are the people, and I will humbly raise my hand and admit I have been this person, who know all the
I've
buzzwords.
been there too.
They can map their childhood wounds with surgical precision.
Mm.
They know their attachment style, their Myers-Briggs, their human design, their
Yeah.
astrological chart,
They have a towering stack of journals.
a mountain of journals.
Mhm.
But they are completely paralyzed when it comes to taking a new action in reality.
They are obsessed with understanding the mechanics of the door.
But they never actually turn the knob and walk through it.
Because lingering in the foyer of understanding feels like progress.
It gives you that hit of dopamine.
Exactly. It generates the neurochemical reward of a breakthrough without the real-world risk of changing your behavior.
Right.
If you don't cross that threshold into the house of being, you are essentially just obsessively redecorating the waiting room of your own life.
Obsessively redecorating the waiting room. That is a brutal mirror.
It is.
So what is the mechanical failure there? Why do we get stuck staring at the door?
Well, the text breaks down the architecture of a threshold itself, arguing that a doorway doesn't just float in empty space.
It's structurally nested.
This is the concept of the holder and the held.
Okay, the holder and the held.
It is a vital diagnostic tool. A threshold, the door, the block, the resistance you feel, is held by a room.
The room.
The room represents the immediate context or environment.
Okay.
But that room doesn't exist in a vacuum either. The room is held by a handler,
A handler.
which represents a deeper historical belief or a legacy script.
Let's ground this, because it sounds a bit like Inception right now. Walk me through the nested architecture of a specific block.
Okay, let's say you are an executive and you have a recurring block. Whenever you need to deliver critical feedback to a subordinate, you freeze.
Very common.
You soften the language so much that the feedback becomes completely meaningless.
Right.
The block, the inability to speak directly, is the door.
That's the threshold.
Most people, especially in stage 2 or stage 3, try to just push harder on the door.
They take a communication workshop,
They try to brute force their way through the block with willpower.
which we know is exhausting and unsustainable.
Right. But if you have transitioned into the architect mindset, you stop pushing on the door and you trace the nested architecture.
You look at the blueprints.
You ask, what room is this door sitting in?
Okay.
You look at the context and realize the room is labeled fear of being disliked.
Okay, so that's good awareness.
It is, but you have to go deeper. What belief is handling that room? Why was that room built in the first place?
You trace it back to the handler.
And you find out the handler is a legacy script from childhood that says, if people are upset with me, I will be abandoned.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So the root cause isn't a lack of communication skill.
Oh,
The root cause is a survival script equating conflict with abandonment.
yes. And until you deal with the handler, you will keep encountering that locked door no matter how many leadership seminars you attend. Precisely. You have to trace the holding to its source. You have to renegotiate the contract with the handler.
Which is terrifying.
It requires a level of radical honesty that frankly terrifies most people, which is exactly why they prefer to stay in the foyer of understanding, continually analyzing the paint color on the door.
Let me pause here and ask you, the listener, directly.
Yeah, think about this.
Think about your own architecture right now. Are you walking back into the arguments of yesterday, analyzing who was right and who was wrong, and calling it reflection when it's actually captivity?
Ooh.
Are you just redecorating the foyer? Or, on the flip side, are you using the future to worry preventatively?
Mapping out all the disasters.
Exactly. Mapping out 50 different disastrous scenarios, generating the illusion that you are being productive and responsible, when really you are just avoiding the threshold of the present moment.
It is a sobering diagnostic
Mirror.
because once you identify the handler, you cannot see it.
Right.
Ignorance is no longer an excuse. You have to take responsibility for redesigning the room.
And that redesign, that literal blueprinting of reality, is exactly where the texts take us next.
Part 3.
You built the house, you're living in it automatically. You understand how to diagnose the thresholds and the handlers.
Now, how do you scale this?
Yes.
Eh.
How do you move beyond your own internal healing and actually design complex futures, teams, and projects intentionally?
This is the bridge into the third and final section of the source material,
Meta-Matics.
the gateway to Meta-Matics.
Yes.
This is where the framework leaves the realm of traditional psychology and becomes an incredibly robust systems design tool.
Now, I have to confess, when I first turned the page and saw the word Meta-Matics, My brain initiated a hard reboot.
A little intimidating.
I was like, wait, are we doing long division with our feelings now? What is happening?
It's not arithmetic.
It's not. The text formally calls it the pseudo-algebraic concept mapping system.
Which is a massive mouthful.
It really is, but the underlying logic is brilliant. It borrows the syntax of algebra relationships, operators, variables, and applies it to the abstract concepts of life and work.
What is fascinating here is the underlying rationale. Why do we need math for our internal lives and our strategic planning?
Why formalize it to this degree?
The text outlines 3 specific reasons: precision, prediction, and design.
Okay.
When you only use intuition, you navigate by feeling. And intuition is a powerful, necessary tool.
Right, we're not knocking intuition.
No, absolutely not. But eventually, as you scale your life, your business, or your relationships, you hit a threshold of complexity that your intuition simply cannot process.
It maxes out.
The variables become too numerous, you lose the plot, you need a map.
You need a mathematical syntax to organize the chaos.
You need to see the actual code.
So let's look at the primary formula the text provides for this concept mapping system.
Okay.
It is written out as A over B, integrated with C over D.
Right.
Or, visually, A/B, then an integration symbol, then C/D.
Let's meticulously define these variables because this is the engine of the entire system.
Go for it.
In this equation, A and C are defined as the iterators.
The iterators.
Yeah.
That is the content.
Yes.
It is the action. It is the raw material, the specific thing you were doing, or the internal capacity you were trying to utilize.
Correct. The iterators are the active elements. And B and D are defined as the delineators.
The delineators are the context.
The environment.
Right, the environment, the boundary conditions, or the filter through which the iterator must pass in order to become reality.
Exactly. So the division symbol, that forward slash between A and B, does not mean divided by in the mathematical sense of fractions.
Okay, what does it mean?
In Meta-Matics, the slash means filtered by or shaped by.
Oh, filter by.
Right. The iterator, which is A, is fundamentally constrained or amplified by the delineator, which is B.
And the integration symbol in the middle, the plus sign with a circle around it, means these two distinct relationships are synthesizing together.
Yes.
They're interacting to generate a larger, combined systemic outcome.
Okay, we absolutely need to ground this with a concrete narrative example from the text, because otherwise it just sounds like we're reading a white paper on theoretical physics.
Seriously, let's explore the example equation the text provides for learning a new skill.
Perfect.
The equation is curiosity filtered by support, integrated with time filtered by engageability.
Let's trace the mechanics of the first half. Curiosity filtered by support.
So curiosity is my iterator.
Yes.
It is my internal content, my raw desire to learn something new. Let's say I want to finally learn how to play the guitar.
A noble pursuit.
Right. My curiosity is currently at a 10 out of 10. But Meta-Matics teaches us that my curiosity does not exist in a vacuum.
It has to pass through the filter.
It must pass through the filter of support, which is my delineator.
Right.
Do I have a good teacher? Are there clear YouTube tutorials? Do my roommates complain every time I strum a chord?
Does your partner encourage you or roll their eyes?
Exactly. My raw curiosity is fundamentally shaped, bottlenecked, or accelerated by the support structures in my environment.
That is exactly right. A high iterator with a 0 delineator yields a 0 result.
Wow.
Now look at the second half of the equation. Time filtered by engageability.
Time is my second iterator.
Yes.
It's the literal hours I have available in a week. Let's say I have 5 hours a week to practice.
But that time is filtered by engageability.
My second delineator.
Right. Engageability is about the friction of the environment.
Is my practice space beautifully set up in the corner of my living room? Or is my guitar buried in the back of a closet behind a vacuum cleaner?
Is the process of starting accessible and inviting, or is it a massive chore to even begin?
And the integration symbol in the center of the equation dictates that your ultimate learning outcome is not just based on how curious you are.
And it isn't just based on how much time you have.
It is the complex synthesis of your curiosity, filtered by support, interacting with your time, filtered by engageability.
It is genuinely mind-blowing when you map out a struggle like that.
It really is, because think about the default user mindset.
Mm-hmm.
If I am failing to learn the guitar, my default internal script says, I'm lazy, I don't have enough willpower, I'm just not disciplined.
You automatically attack the iterator.
Yes, I
Yeah.
attack my own character. But when I look at the Meta-Matics equation, I can see the real diagnostic picture.
My curiosity is high and my time is sufficient.
The iterators are fine. The math is failing because my support is 0. And the engageability is terrible because the guitar has a broken string and is hidden in the basement.
The precision of the diagnosis changes entirely.
You stop moralizing your
You
failures.
stop attacking your character and you start redesigning your environment.
You change the delineators.
Yes, you fix the context instead of flogging the content. And that realization brings us to the final and arguably most important mechanical rule in the Meta-Matics system.
The inversion kick.
The inversion kick. This is the cognitive rhythm that sustains the entire architecture.
The inversion kick is basically the systemic law that you cannot just focus on the iterator and you cannot just focus on the delineator.
You will fail if you only do one.
You have to actively alternate. You have to kick your focus back and forth between them.
If we connect this to the bigger picture of how businesses and projects fail, the necessity of the inversion kick becomes really obvious.
How so?
Well, it prevents catastrophic tunnel vision.
Oh?
Let's say you enter a project through the content door. You are hyper-focused on the iterator. You are heads down, doing the deep work, writing the code, writing the book, practicing the guitar.
Which is necessary.
That is necessary.
Yeah.
But if you stay there indefinitely, you lose sight of the context.
Yeah.
You build a brilliant piece of software that has 0 market fit. You write a book that nobody wants to read. You burn out because your environment is toxic.
So the inversion kick is the mechanism that taps you on the shoulder and forces you to step back and become the architect of the delineator.
You stop doing the work and you manage the context.
You look at your schedule, you check your market fit, you reorganize your workspace, you renegotiate your support systems.
But, and this is equally crucial, you cannot stay there either. If you only manage context, you become the workshop junkie we talked about in the Foyer of Understanding.
You spend 6 months perfectly planning the ultimate project management dashboard, but you never actually execute a single task.
You have perfect delineators and 0 iterators.
So the inversion kick forces you back to the content.
It is an endless dynamic alternation. Content, context, content, context.
Doing the work, designing the environment, doing the work, designing the environment.
It perfectly mirrors the process of creating music.
Oh, I love this comparison.
There is a concept mentioned briefly in the sources, the 11-step flow.
Right.
It maps the journey of an idea from conception all the way to completion.
If we think about that 11-step flow as the structure of a song, the verse, the chorus, the bridge.
Then the Meta-Matics notation, the A over B, integrated with C over D.
That is the literal sheet music.
Yes.
It tells you exactly what notes to play and how the variables interact.
But the inversion kick.
That is the tempo. That is the rhythm of the breathing. You can't just play by ear forever if you want to compose a complex symphony.
Okay, you can't.
You need the structural flow, the mathematical sheet music, and the breathing rhythm of the inversion kick, all working together in synthesis.
That is a phenomenal synthesis of the material because it highlights the profound interdependence of the entire text.
Yeah.
Without the somatic embodiment work of part 2, the unconscious competence, the visceral feeling of the rhythm, the mastery of the 40p triggers, the math in part 3 is entirely lifeless.
It is just abstract algebra on a dry erase board.
But conversely, without the mathematical mapping of part 3, you are navigating the complexities of your life purely by feeling and intuition.
Which inevitably caps your ability to scale your impact.
The 2 parts desperately need each other. The artisan must be guided by the architect, and the architect's blueprints must be built by the artisan.
Okay, let's zoom all the way out and look at the massive terrain we have just traversed in this deep dive.
It's been quite a journey.
We started by looking at the terrifying, beautiful reality of the fractal truth.
How our internal micro-habits and fears aren't actually personal.
Right. They ripple out, scale up, and literally architect the cultural and ecological systems around us.
We learn the mechanics of moving from being a purely reactive thermometer R1V to holding our own energetic center as an autonomous variable AV1.
We then explored the arduous but necessary journey of making those new aligned choices automatic.
We mapped the path through the friction of conscious competence.
Utilizing 40p processing until the neural pathways myelinated and the architecture became unconscious competence.
A state of default alignment where boundaries are reflexes, freeing up our cognitive RAM for higher complexity.
We crossed the threshold from the Foyer of Understanding into the House of Being by identifying our legacy handlers.
And finally, we learned how to map those newly automatic habits into the pseudo-algebraic blueprints of Meta-Matics,
allowing us to accurately diagnose our failures by separating our iterators from our delineators.
And utilizing the inversion kick to maintain a dynamic rhythm of growth.
It is the complete evolutionary journey. from a passive user of reality to an architect of your environment to a highly conscious participant in the fractal system.
It really is.
And that brings us to our final parting thought for today. A reflection derives straight from the core philosophy of these texts.
Okay.
If you have integrated this material, you are no longer just a user, randomly clicking the familiar icons on the desktop of your own mind, hoping the machine finally works differently this time.
You have unlocked the developer mode.
You have the admin password, you have access to the underlying machine code, and you have the pseudo-algebraic blueprints to rewrite it.
You now understand the thresholds, the legacy handlers holding you back, and the exact mathematical relationship between your actions and your environments.
You have the tools to redesign the equation.
So the question you have to ask yourself is no longer, can I change?
The mechanics of change are now in your hands.
The real question is, if you can now mathematically graph out a future reality before you even live it, adjusting the variables of your own existence, what world are you going to design tomorrow morning?
It is a profound invitation to step into your own agency. Take a hard look at your own iterators and delineators today.
See where the math of your life is breaking down. Stop blaming your character and start redesigning the equation.
The interface is no longer a mystery. The keyboard is yours. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. We'll see you in the next one.